You're tuned in to More Living with Jim Brogan, broadcast live from the Brogan Financial Studios at News Talk 98.7, where old-fashioned values, expert knowledge, and genuine understanding come together to give you the retirement straight talk you deserve. Jim's a former National Advisor of the Year recipient and a financial educator, and he's here today to talk about how you can live out the best years of your life. Jim and the Brogan Financial team have been helping retirees and pre-retirees across the Southeast for over 20 years in their pursuit of financial independence. You can reach them during the week at 865-862-6800. So sit back, relax, and get ready to learn, because More Living with Jim Brogan starts now.
Hello, East Tennessee, and welcome to More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. This is News Talk 98.7 WOKI. You know, Americans have lofty goals for their retirement, but most people, according to the data, are far from reaching that goal. Only 4% of today's retirees said they are, quote, living the retirement dream. How can you determine what you need to save, how much, how to invest the money, how to structure income, and find ways to ensure that you have enough to last throughout your entire retirement life? Today, I'm excited to welcome back Dr. Wade Pfau, someone who I've known and been a friend of mine for years as a colleague. He holds a doctorate in economics and a master's degree from Princeton University. He is an expert on retirement and someone I respect immensely in the field of retirement planning. He's with the American College and also hosts a website along with a couple of other guys called The Retirement Researcher. He is considered really one of our industry leaders when it comes to retirement research, income planning, all the different challenges you face in your retirement years and how to be successful. Welcome back to the show, Wade. Great to talk to you.
Yeah, great to talk to you. How are you doing, Jim?
Absolutely. I've been doing great. How are you? You still down in Texas, right?
I am, yeah, in the Dallas area.
That's awesome. Wade, how did you get your start in finance and academia? You know, what drew you into this world?
Well, in high school, I just started getting interested in economics, and so I went the traditional route of economics in college. And financial planning, it became a new field in like a lot of universities don't even have financial planning programs. So it's really then after finishing school, trying to do applied research in economics, kind of stumbling into the whole retirement planning space as a way to really do something practical and useful for everyday life, but still have that connection to the broader economics world.
That's a great word. You know, we all have different paths of how we get here. You know, it kind of broadsided me because I was a music major undergrad, and then got my MBA, and I wanted to go into the music business, and then I took a 6-hour finance block because I thought there was more corporate finance in that block, but it was entirely investment finance, and I fell in love with it. So it's just kind of funny how things evolve and our interests are developed. Wade, if someone's thinking about their retirement, I like to say it's all about the income. You know, people retire. To borrow a phrase of a friend of ours, people don't retire on assets, they retire on income. Does it all start with income and income sources in retirement?
Right, that you need to figure out how to position your assets to provide the cash flows to meet your financial goals in retirement, your expenses. These are things you have to fund, and you're no longer funding that from your employment income. So you have to, that's why we save for retirement. We're going to have to use our financial assets to generate that income to meet our expenses in retirement.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know, for someone sitting down and thinking less than 4 in every 10 investors have a retirement savings target in their mind. You know, you hear these things, what's your number? Is there a magic number that people need to retire? How can people start to think about how much money they need to retire?
I really do think it's important to focus more on just saving what you can. The whole conversation around what's your retirement number, there is some math connected to that the idea behind it is you figure out how much you want to spend from your investments after Social Security and other things. And then you have to multiply that by, say, something like 25. And then that's your quote unquote number that if you can save that much, you can retire. But really, there's a lot more that goes into it than that. And I guess it's better to have a number in mind than nothing. But sometimes those numbers may be too overly conservative, and it becomes too difficult to actually save as much as you're hoping for with that.
Yeah, and I hear all the time. I still hear it today. I don't hear it so much from people coming into my office or attending my classes, but I hear it all the time in the media and things. Can I retire on $1 million, or is $1.5 million? The average retiree needs $1.5 million or $1.2 million, whatever it is. I've always found those things to be kind of silly because, how much are you spending? What do your other income sources look like? I mean, there's just so many variables that go into it, right?
Right, and your age, other income sources. It's really hard to focus on that sort of thinking, but I guess it's easy to come up with numbers that way, at least. And those can provide guidelines to help people. It's just not everyone's case is different.
That's exactly right. So, when it comes to retirement income, so, you had mentioned, hey, when you cross that threshold in retirement, you no longer have earned income. So now your life savings has to generate that income. And that puts a separate kind of stress on the nest egg. Can you talk a little bit, it'll probably be a big source of our show today, but I know you talk about the different retirement income styles. So why don't we start there, and then we'll just kind of branch off and look at each of these retirement income styles that you talk about.
Sure. So when I first started getting interested in retirement planning, I'd just read these debates online that would get very heated, that people just have completely different viewpoints about how to approach retirement. And through my research, what I've come to ultimately accept is there are different retirement styles, there are different general approaches people can use, and one's not better than the other. It really just depends on an individual's preferences for how they want to source retirement income. And so a lot of times in the consumer media, the default is what I call total return, and that's more of the investment-based approach. That's more connected to something like having a number that, if you talk about the 4% rule or something like that, that says, build a diversified investment portfolio and spend from it in retirement. We find is only about a third of the population resonates with that. Another approach there is income protection, which is about when it comes to your essential expenses in retirement, you don't necessarily want to take stock market risk for that. You really want to build a floor of protected lifetime income sources to have your basics covered. And then once you do that, you can invest, and you have the ability to stomach market volatility because your basics are covered no matter what happens in the stock market. And that is the most popular style. We tend to find closer to 35 to 40% of people identify with that. And then there's two others too. There's the bucketing-based approaches, and then something we call risk wrap, which is really a cousin of the income protection approach.
So let's talk a little bit about the 4% rule, because a lot of people do talk about that, which of course means, hey, look at your life savings. You can start drawing 4% in year one of retirement and increase that over time. When it comes to the total return approach, Wade, talk a little bit about some of the challenges about how we bring on risk of, hey, when are the good markets? When are the good years in the market? When are the bad years in the market? That sequence of return risk. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I think it's so critical for people to understand that risk.
Yeah, with the total return approach, you have to self-manage. You're talking about the market risk, so there's that and the longevity risk. You don't know how long you're going to live, so you have to assume you'll live a very long time and spend less. But then on the market risk side, with the sequence of return risk, market volatility has a different impact in retirement for a household than it does pre-retirement. Because if there's a market downturn when you're saving for retirement, in a way you can benefit because your new savings, you get to buy on the dip, you get to buy more shares, and that's a good thing. But when you're retired, when there's a market dip, if you have a fixed spending goal that you have to meet, you have to sell a bigger percentage of what's left in the portfolio, and then that's gone, so that even if the overall financial markets recover, your portfolio doesn't enjoy that full recovery. And so retirees are more vulnerable to financial market downturns just in the years right after they retire. And then when you get to later in retirement, if you've already been retired 15, 20 years, at that point, whether or not you're going to have a successful retirement has already been determined. Even a big market downturn can't really do a whole lot at that point, because if you've been using a conservative spending strategy, your wealth generally will continue to grow throughout retirement, and you'll be in good shape. You're just really vulnerable to what happens in those early retirement years.
Yeah, can you expand a little bit more on that, Wade, in terms of that first 5 to 10 years? How much does it really drive our success or failure in retirement?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I've done some statistical work on that if you're projecting, say, a 30-year-long retirement, you'd think, well, the first 10 years, that's 10 out of 30, that should be a 33% of the impact. But that's not how it works. It's much closer to 80% in terms of how much can I sustainably spend in retirement? Is it going to be a big number or a low number? 80% of that is determined by what happens in the first third of the retirement, in the first 10 years out of a 30-year retirement. And that's just because the market returns in those early years matter so disproportionately to the long-term success of that retirement plan.
Yeah, and that's because of what you were talking about earlier. When we're saving money, we actually take advantage of market dips because we're buying in when markets are down. But when we use a total return approach, we're actually doing the opposite. We're selling when markets are down. And I do feel like one of the keys to wealth management is to not spend a significant investment loss.
And that's really, it becomes the challenge. And so much, well, in a way, the 4% rule is really an inefficient way to approach retirement, because if you can figure out ways to not have to sell assets at a loss, that helps manage the sequence of returns risk. And then that becomes the big challenge for retirees is what sort of style or approach do I want to take towards protecting assets against fails during market downturns?
Yeah, protecting short-term income. We're visiting with Dr. Wade Pfau. He's really a thought leader in our industry. He's a professor at the American College, has founded the retirement research that he's published. When we come back, we're going to really dive into this subject of income planning for retirement and how you can structure it to protect you in the short term when markets have inevitably downturns. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living right here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm your host, Jim Brogan. We're with you every Saturday from 9 to 10 a.m. and again from 3 to 4 p.m. You can also catch all of our podcasts. You can go to my website at broganfinancial.com and click on radio, or you can download at Spotify or Apple Podcast. Today we're visiting with retirement researcher Wade Pfau. He is really a visionary and a leading source in our industry for both professionals and for retirees and soon-to-be retirees on the importance of retirement planning. And Wade, while we were in the break, we did have a caller that called in that's apparently a federal worker, and he had a question just about retirement challenges for federal employees. Can you touch a little bit on that?
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of specific rules related to the pensions and health care, and so whether or not Medicare is going to be in the picture. But I guess it depends when you started employment. If you have that traditional defined benefit federal pension, making sure that you figure out the right decisions there in terms of which benefits to select, how that interacts with health care and retirement. It's kind of a whole another world that sidesteps some of the conversations around Social Security and Medicare. So just making sure that you're up to date on all that, like the federal employees' health benefits and everything related to that.
Absolutely. And, along those lines, Wade, pensions have been phased out by most private companies. Now, you see some larger companies and certainly government agencies offer pensions. Is one thing I thought about when the caller asked about federal employees. But the shift from a traditional pension, which as you mentioned is called a defined benefit plan, And the shift to more defined contribution plans like 401ks, 403bs, 457s, it puts the onus on the employee to continue to save on their own and make wise choices. Talk about this shift over the last 40 years of putting more of the onus on the employee, and how critical it is to understand that. And is that one of the reasons so many people are behind on their retirement planning?
Yeah, absolutely. This has really been what makes retirement planning more important. Earlier in the mid 20th century and so forth, people might only be looking at a 10 or 15-year retirement so that they didn't need as much compared to today, where if you're retiring in your 60s, you may have to really plan for 30 or 40 years in retirement. And then the point you're making, in the past, for those shorter retirements, people tended to have those traditional defined benefit pensions that replaced their paycheck so that you didn't have to worry, what if I live to 100? It's okay because I have this pension, it pooled risk across the population, just like Social Security does, that will provide me those monthly checks no matter how long I live. And that's in contrast to suddenly we did away with all that. We switched from defined benefits to defined contribution. But I've heard one government official even say it's really undefined contribution. Retirement savings became voluntary. You're supposed to save a portion of your paycheck and hopefully get an employer match on that. But then you have to figure out how to invest it. And then when you get to retirement, you've got your nest egg, and then you have to figure out what to do with it. And in the old days, that was covered. You had the company pension that would pay you for your lifetime. Today, you have to decide, are you going to go with that total return approach and just continue to invest in retirement and figure out how to spend from those assets? Or do you want to recreate the defined benefit pension using some sort of commercial annuity that provides support for a lifetime income? And that would be more of the income protection approach, making sure you do have your basics covered and not exposed to market volatility. But that It really creates much more challenge for households to figure this out.
Yeah, and it puts the onus on the employee rather than the employer. You mentioned the income protection. In just a minute, I want to ask you a couple of questions about income protection. But before we leave this issue of saving for retirement, a recent study found that the average amount held in a retirement account today is $88,400. So that means the typical worker has, according to this study, about a $1.3 or $1.4 million gap between their savings and their retirement aspirations. Is this people living above their means, or do you think it's a lack of financial literacy, or is it a pretty heavy mix of both?
Well, I think a lot goes into that. I wouldn't just say, part of it may be a lack of financial literacy and so forth, but just people are so pressured these days. There's so many different competing obligations. And at the end of the day, with retirement being more abstract and in the distant future, it does tend to get a lower priority, that there may be other obligations that need to be taken care of first. And then ultimately that does lead the average person to get to retirement with not a whole lot of assets saved. And if you do get to retirement with, I think you said $88,000, then this whole conversation around how to use your investments, it kind of goes to the wayside, because you really need to hold on to something like that for emergencies. And so then what you have to focus on more is the Social Security claiming decisions. And if you do own a home and have home equity, is there a way you can incorporate your home equity to generate more retirement income? But with savings at those levels, the 4% rule on $88,000 is not going to make much difference.
That's not going to get you very far. You've mentioned longevity a couple of times, and I often like to refer to longevity as the mother of all retirement risks, because people are living longer and longer lives. Wade, a married couple today, 65 years old, how long can they expect to live before they're both gone? It's funny, I asked that question in my class, and I hear things like 83, 85. What does the data tell us?
Oh, yeah, that's way too low, especially if you're a non-smoker. You don't have to be in great health, but a non-smoker in decent health, there's a good shot, over 50% chance that one of those individuals is still going to be alive at 93, 94, 95. And it really is becoming the case that, again, for people in decent health who don't smoke, you really have to plan that one of those individuals is going to still be around in their 90s. And even alone, if there's just one person, 83 is way too low. The life expectancies now for people who make it into their 60s are in the late 80s. And you really have to plan beyond that, because you flip a coin, half of the people are going to live past their late 80s. So you really have to plan for longer retirement horizons. You can't just assume, say my parents didn't make it past the 80s, so I'm not either. Longevity improves over time. People are living longer and longer with each passing decade. And
That's
today's
exactly
retirees, right. They need to plan for a longer retirement.
Yeah, and one of the things I sometimes hear, Wade, is, well, my spending's going to go down, and certainly discretionary spending can go down. But I believe you had published some data or some research, or maybe I had looked at it with you at a conference where it basically showed that because of the increase in things like healthcare expenses, people's spending in retirement doesn't just stay stable and then drop off a cliff because their discretionary spending goes down. What I remember from your research is it's really more of just a gradual decline. Can you touch a little bit about, like, what does somebody's income need when they're 88 as opposed to 65?
Yes, so the research you may be referring to, it's from a colleague of mine, David Blanchett. He talked about the retirement spending smile, which is that, so as people age, there's this concept of you have the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years. As you're getting into your 80s, you're just not necessarily making those world trips anymore, that sort of thing. So spending declines with age gradually, but then the issue is late in life. Health or medical or long-term care-related expenses can start to pick up. And so you have that offset. So that it's like a smile shape. Spending declines until your mid-80s, and then for the average person, spending starts to pick up again past your mid-80s to account for these other mobility or health or long-term care-related expenses.
So the retirement income smile, I think that is a great illustration of that. Now, you mentioned the income protection strategy. So as one retirement income style, of course, you mentioned one is the total return approach. One is income protection. Can you expand a little bit more on that? I guess you'd mentioned, setting a stable income that pays your expenses. How do you handle then discretionary and variable expenses? Talk a little bit about the income protection income style.
Yeah, with income protection, the kind of preferences that go into that, you really want, when it comes to your basic expenses in retirement, you want protections. You don't want to have to rely on stock market volatility and growth to cover your basics. You want that protected with some sort of contractual guarantee behind it. And you're comfortable committing to a strategy that will solve your lifetime financing problem. So it's really the approach that's most closely linked to the academic research, which is, when it comes to essential spending, you want protected income sources. That means you want to make a really good decision around when to claim Social Security to get the most lifetime spending power out of those Social Security benefits. You want to take advantage of the traditional pensions for those who still have them. And then you want to look at the gap. If there's a gap between this is how much reliable income I have through Social Security and pensions, that's less than what I'd really like to have as reliable income, then you look to fill that gap with a protected lifetime income source that has contractual guarantees. And that's where the A word comes into the conversation, the annuity, the idea that insurance companies can provide financial approaches that solve for this lifetime spending need by pooling that risk across a large collection of customers. And the idea of income protection is you draw more from the fixed income side of your investment portfolio to fund those protected income sources, because once you have this reliable income in place, you have more discretion for your other investment assets. You can, if you're comfortable, if you have the risk tolerance, you can invest more aggressively, you can spend more aggressively, because that is more for the discretionary side where you have flexibility. Now, if markets do great, I'll spend a lot more, I'll go on another trip. But if markets do poorly, you have the capacity to spend less on the discretionary side. You've got your basics covered. And for people who are income protection, they really feel a lot more comfortable taking that approach than an approach that says, don't worry about reliable income, just spend from your diversified portfolio as you want throughout retirement. It's really a different mindset, and it is really more popular with the overall population in the U.S., though the consumer media does tend to default to total returns. And that's simply because most people pre-retirement behave like their total returns. You invest and save for retirement. And the financial media is still catching up to this idea that post-retirement risks change, and not everyone's comfortable using the same investment-based approach post-retirement as they used pre-retirement.
Yeah, well, two things that come to mind there. One is I often say, Wade, the plan that gets you to retirement is not going to be the plan to get you through retirement. The other one, though, is longevity. You mentioned stock volatility over time, but the stock market historically has been the best way to fight inflation, historically over a longer period of time, 20 or 30 years. So when we come back, we're going to dive into the inflation risks with managing the stability of short-term income with growth of long-term income over time. We'll also get into Social Security decisions. So stay with us as we visit with retirement researcher Wade Pfau, really an industry leader and thought innovator in our industry. You're listening to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
This is More Living with Jim Brogan, where it's all about living the best years of your life your way. You're listening to News Talk 98.7 WOKI, and we're visiting with Dr. Wade Pfau. He is really a thought leader in the financial and especially the retirement planning industry. He teaches he's a pioneer at the American College, and then, of course, he also has his special research, retirementresearcher.com. And we were talking there about, we've talked about longevity. There in that last segment, Wade, you were talking about people want their fixed expenses, they want them to be secure knowing that they've got those covered. And one of the phrases I thought is, you don't want to take a fixed income from a variable investment. Going for fixed safety of income, though, can that lead to more inflationary risk down the line? And talk about, I like to say inflation is like cholesterol. It's a silent killer of retirement income. So talk about how we can, you've talked a little bit about protecting income for the short term, but then how can we position assets to grow to provide inflation protection in the long term?
Yeah, this is a really important issue because a lot of the criticisms that come against reliable income sources, not Social Security, it is inflation protected, but commercial annuities and so forth, is they don't provide growth to meet inflation. Now, there are some that can provide growth over time, but let's set that aside and just say we're talking about an annuity with a protected lifetime income that does not increase over time. And then the criticism is, well, you don't have any inflation protection. Now, I think that criticism really kind of thinks of things as all or nothing, that you either put all your money in the annuity or nothing in the annuity. And that's not how things work in real life. What I find in my research if you put part of your assets in the protected lifetime income stream that does not increase over time, it becomes a workhorse for providing spending power. And the longer you live, the more of your spending is sourced to this annuity product that it's really providing a disproportionate amount of your spending. And what that does is it puts less pressure on your remaining investment assets. Over time, your remaining investments are just, they're going to be the source of your discretionary spending. But the overall pressure, the distribution pressure is less. And that helps manage that sequence of returns risk I talked about earlier. And it allows those other investment assets to grow more effectively over time. And so it makes it easier for those other investment assets to provide the inflation protection. That if you have a growing pot of assets on the sideline that can grow less hampered by the need to meet overall general expenses, they can grow, they can provide the source of inflation over time. And that's really, I think, a more efficient way to approach the inflation question. Use protected lifetime income sources to cover the basics. Don't worry about inflation protection there, but then that makes it easier for other assets to provide the source of inflation protection through their
Exactly.
growth.
So, the big risk in the short term is stock market volatility, but in the long term, inflation becomes more and more powerful of a risk. Now, some of what you're talking about there, Wade, as you know from our past conversations, I'm a big fan of a bucket approach, which has some similarities to the income protection, but not entirely, of course. There are some key differences, but to talk a little bit about the bucket approach and the idea of regardless of your approach, even if you have a total return approach, having buffer assets to draw from when markets inevitably decline.
Right. So the bucketing approach, it is another retirement style. And to be clear, the funny thing about the bucket approach is there's no standard definition. So individuals who include protected income in the bucketing approach, that's what you said exactly. It's maybe a hybrid of income protection and bucketing. For me to define it as purely a style on its own as bucketing, there's a sense of you're not going to use protected lifetime income sources. You just invest differently based on the time horizon so that you have your fixed income bond assets in these short-term buckets to cover short-term expenses. And then you have your stocks or your growth-based assets in the longer-term buckets, earmarked more for longer-term expenses. And then as you go through retirement, you spend from your short-term buckets and you replenish them from your long-term buckets. And kind of the psychological quirk that can help people with this strategy is it makes them feel comfortable staying in the market during periods of market volatility. Because if I know that I have my next 5 years covered with short-term buckets and there's a stock market downturn, I can relax and take a step back and say, it's okay. I'm pretty sure the market's going to recover within 5 years. And then at that time, I can sell from my growth buckets. But I've got my spending covered, so I don't have to panic. I don't have to sell all my stocks because I'm worried about market volatility and so forth. And so it can help people stay the course. And that's the bucketing approach. It appeals to wanting flexibility for assets, but also wanting protections, at least for short-term expenses.
We're visiting with Dr. Wade Pfau. He's the retirement researcher, and we're talking about the specific challenges of retirement income and just overall retirement planning. Wade, let's dive into Social Security income. It's estimated that Social Security replaces roughly a third of people's income, but now that's such a broad brush. That's the problem with statistics about like that is it's such a broad brush across a lot of people. But certainly we have seen a steady decrease in the income replacement for years. In other words, how much Social Security income provides for somebody's retirement income percentage-wise has declined over the years. Where do you see Social Security solvency 10 to 20 years from now? I mean, we know the numbers. The trust fund will run out in 9 to 10 years. What do you think really will happen with Social Security? Because I get asked that question all the time.
So a lot of people I hear will say, I just want to assume Social Security is going to disappear and plan around that. And I'm all for conservative planning assumptions, but I think that's taking it way too far. Even the worst case scenario is simply it's not like when the trust fund depletes, which the new trustees report just came out a week or two ago and said it's now in 2035 is when the Social Security trust fund is expected to deplete. But that doesn't mean Social Security disappears. That just means there's still the new payroll taxes coming in from workers is projected to pay about 80% of the promised benefits. So the worst case scenario, and this would require congressional action, an across the board 20% benefit cut is kind of the worst case scenario on that. But if Congress is forced to take some sort of action, they're probably not going to simply do an across-the-board benefit cut. They're probably going to, there may be some benefit cuts, but they'll be put in over the long term, like they'll increase the full retirement age gradually over time. Probably there's also going to be some payroll tax increases that are part of any compromise legislation as well. So if listeners want to assume maybe what their Social Security statement tells them their benefit will be, maybe take a haircut on that of 10 to 20%. I think that's enough to have a conservative projection with regard to Social Security. I think it's really overdoing it to assume that Social Security is going to simply disappear and not be available to people,
I completely
to any
agree with
Americans,
that.
even young people.
I completely agree with that. And I think that the older somebody is, the less likely they're going to see a significant reduction, I think. But raising full retirement age alone, people need to understand, if they raised full retirement age from 67 to 69, that's effectively a 16% decrease in your full retirement age benefit, right? So that alone would cause young people's retirement benefit to go down.
Right, right. Like for me personally, I'm planning under current rules, planning to delay until 70. But if the full retirement age for me gets pushed from 67 to 69, like you said, yeah, that is effectively at age 70, I'm only going to get an 8% boost to my benefit instead of a 24% boost. So it's the same as
It's
a benefit.
dramatic. Yeah, it is a dramatic thing. Our Social Security benefits currently are means tested. I mean, the more income we make, the more of our Social Security income is taxable. Also, the more income we make, the more Medicare premium we potentially could end up having to pay. Those are means tested benefits. Do you think we could see more of that in the future? I mean, right now, even a millionaire or somebody with $1 million a year of retirement income still gets 15% of their Social Security tax free. Do you think that's something that could easily change in the future? Because I do. I think that's something that could pretty easily change. Just want your opinion on that.
I do, because the way Social Security benefits are taxed right now, it's one of the most complicated things ever created. And if they simply said, okay, we're doing away with the whole current system, just your Social Security benefits go into your adjusted gross income like other income sources, I could easily see that being part of any future kind of reform to Social Security. This is more like stealth means testing, where means testing is simply kind of your benefit is linked to your income. And if you have too high of income, you don't get any benefit. Social Security's full history was to avoid that, because that makes Social Security into a welfare program, and that would create a stigma. So having pure means testing, though it's possible, it's unlikely. But I do think Congress will look at these sorts of stealth means testing, which is, in the past, Social Security benefits weren't taxable, but by making them taxable, people with higher incomes in retirement end up losing more of their Social Security benefits on an after-tax basis. So absolutely, things along those lines are surely going to be on the table for reform possibilities.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the self-means testing, kind of what you're saying there is what I'm referring to. Obviously, with people living longer and longer lives, Wade, more and more people, you're seeing more and more out there that delay your retirement benefit to 70. You just said that's your plan. It's certainly my plan. However, sometimes I do talk about, can you afford to delay the benefit? And that kind of addresses, you don't want to spend down your assets too heavily in that first 10 years. We talked about that earlier. Talk a little bit about that dynamic. Can everybody afford to delay their benefit to 70?
Right. That's the real pressure. People who are forced into retirement, say in their early 60s, they're going to be told that the most optimal strategy is for at least the high earner in the couple, the person with the higher Social Security benefit, to wait until age 70. But if you simply can't afford to do that, you may be forced to claim earlier. But the logic of having the high earner wait until 70 is, compared to age 62, that's a 76 or 77% higher inflation-adjusted Social Security benefit for the rest of your life. And the odds are you're going to live well past the age that makes it worthwhile to delay. And so it becomes it's okay ultimately then to spend your investment assets more aggressively while you're waiting to start Social Security, because your Social Security benefit is going to be so much larger after that point. Now, you can't spend your investment assets down to zero because you need a buffer for unexpected emergencies and so forth. And that's where this issue comes into play, that if you just don't have enough investments to support delaying Social Security, you may be forced to claim earlier. And it's kind of an unfortunate thing, just because that means a lower standard of living throughout retirement, but it may be unavoidable in some cases.
Absolutely. It's interesting because the tables, the actuarial tables that determine life expectancy when this math was created and calculated, wasn't that from the 1980s? I mean, that's 40 some years ago, right? People are living longer lives. Yeah, so now we're in 2024. We're 41 years later, and there's been no adjustment to that. So, in other words, if the average person today is living a good bit longer than they lived in 1983, then the way the Social Security system is built, you'll typically draw more money. The average person will if they delay their benefit, correct?
Right, because the reason I mentioned like the high earner in the couple or the person with the higher benefit, because that can potentially become the survivor benefit if the surviving spouse. So that the high earner's benefit lasts for the joint lifetime of two people in the relationship. And the odds of at least one of them, we talked about this earlier in the show, making it past like age 80 is really high. And so the odds are really in favor of benefiting by having the high earner delay their Social Security benefit.
That's exactly. 70. Yeah. So it's not just how long am I going to live, it's how long is my spouse going to live. And so for my wife and I as an example, if I delay to 70 and then when I'm 78, I were to pass away, she'd be 76, she might live 20 more years. She's going to get my full benefit, and it no longer matters when she drew her benefit, right?
Right. That's why there's more flexibility. The lower earning member of the couple might decide to claim earlier because their benefit only sticks around for as long as both individuals are alive, since that high benefit becomes a survivor benefit.
We're visiting with Dr. Wade Pfau. I've gotten so into it with you, Wade, I've kind of lost track of time. We need to get to our last break. When we come back, we'll have kind of a short segment, but I do want to talk about the impact of income taxes in retirement and the fact that we have typically more control of our income tax bill in retirement than any other time in our lives. I want to get Wade's thoughts on that and how you can impact your spending by reducing your taxes. So stay with us. This is More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
Welcome back to News Talk 98.7's Brogan Financial Studios, where Jim Brogan is coming to you live with important news and advice to help you achieve your dream retirement. Get ready to learn and live. Here's your host, Jim Brogan.
Welcome back to More Living here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI. I'm Jim Brogan. We're visiting with Dr. Wade Pfau, the retirement researcher, and we're talking about the different challenges for retirement income. I mentioned income taxes, Wade, and we don't have much time left, but real quickly, we can choose where we draw our income from, and largely, unless you have all of your money in retirement accounts, you can decide where to draw from and how it's taxed. We can decide when to draw Social Security, which can affect our taxation. We don't have to take money out of retirement accounts until we're 73 or 75, depending on when you're born. We know taxes, Wade, are going up at the end of next year. In your view, what is the risk here in just a minute or so? What's the risk that they'll go up a good bit more in our future? Like not necessarily next year, but in the next 10 years.
Well, right. Under current law in 2026, we go back to the tax rates from 2017, and to not have that happen would require congressional action. So we can assume tax rates are going up, and that's like the 12% bracket becomes 15%, the 22% bracket becomes 25%, and so forth. Beyond that, there's definitely pressure on federal debts and so forth, and so it is reasonable to assume at some point in the future taxes will be even higher. So in that regard, tax planning becomes really important. This is actually, I like writing computer programs to simulate complicated things. And so in my retirement planning guidebook, the tax planning chapter is the longest. And it's all about managing the tax code efficiently. And the idea of Roth conversions comes up, moving assets from your 401k or traditional IRA into Roth accounts. And paying taxes today can potentially lay a foundation for paying less taxes in the future. And that's not what matters, but then having more after-tax spending power.
That's what it's all about. And I talk, too, about, realizing long-term gains. Some people can do that in a 0% tax bracket.
Right. Oh, yes, absolutely.
Which is a big thing.
Preferential income stacked on top of ordinary income is another complication in the tax codes. So
it sure is. It's important. So I think the takeaway is, for me, retirement planning and financial planning, tax planning really has to be a core component of that planning. Dr. Wade Pfau, we're out of time. Retirementresearcher.com, is that the best way to follow you?
It is. Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, retirementresearcher.com. My friend Wade Pfau, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. Thank you to Jill for helping produce the show. Thank you to Wayne for engineering the show. You've been listening to More Living with Jim Brogan here on News Talk 98.7 WOKI.
The views expressed by Jim Brogan and his guests are not that of Cumulus Media. Any discussion of financial, legal, and tax planning strategies is not intended to be individualized advice and is general in nature. Always consult with your advisor for advice specific to your needs. This program's content does not represent a recommendation of any particular security, strategy, or investment by Jim Brogan or Brogan Financial Incorporated.